I've not once in my life read a business book. How can I think bigger? How can I imagine a world which is so far beyond the current status quo? The renting experience across all these major cities is equally abysmal. Never did I think that we would be involved in a missing persons case.
You can invite me instead.
All right.
Hi guys, I'm Elliot and I'm here today with John from Habyt.
Hi, I'm John. I'm the CEO of Habyt here in APAC.
You're like the guy, you're like the main guy in Habyt. And also, from what we know, also you're kind of more of a family guy.
Yeah.
Tell us something maybe you don't,
Oh,
that no one really knows about you.
I get this question quite a lot. People ask me, John, what business books would you recommend? What business books would you recommend to me to read to, progress in my knowledge and understanding of the world? And it's funny, guys, because I can hand on heart say that I've not once in my life read a business book. Not once in my life.
Okay.
I steer clear of it. And the reason is, look, I think that we're in a world where we get a lot of information about the world around us. And what we sometimes lack is creativity, right? It's creativity and it's sources of creativity. So if you look at what I currently read, at any point in time, I'm reading probably one science fiction book, I'm reading one fantasy novel, and maybe one contemporary fiction. And that's my respite, that's my sanctuary. And I read these books for fun, but I find that it adds a new element into how I live and how I work and how I think. And so often when I'm asked that question, my answer is, hey, pick up Isaac Asimov, right? Pick up something with Brandon Sanderson, right? Challenge yourself to do something and read something that maybe you would otherwise never do.
I'm quite sure that might catch people off guard because they're like expecting a business response.
Yeah.
They're like, read this book about dragons.
Dragons, aliens.
So how do you for yourself, maybe see the direct application from, those fantasy novels into, the things that you do?
There's one book or one author recently that I've been reading a lot more of. His name is Larry Niven. And he's written some phenomenal books over the past decades. And one thing I liked about what he does is that he thinks maybe on a grander scale than any other science fiction author that I've encountered in my life. And that perspective of thinking orders of magnitude bigger than what you and I would ever traditionally think forces me to ask myself, am I thinking big enough? All right? Whether that's for my ambitions, for myself, for my company, for my team, how can I think bigger? How can I imagine a world which is so far beyond the current status quo?
I did a bit of stalking on you on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So notice that you've lived in Australia, you've lived in a few other countries as well. Yeah. How does actually Singapore compare to those markets in terms of renting?
I've had the privilege of living and working in many places around the world, right? From Malaysia to Hong Kong to Australia to the UK to the US, China, and now here in Singapore for the past 10 years. And what I can say is that the renting experience across all these major cities is equally abysmal. It's hard. No matter which city you're in, it's difficult, right? Regardless of the in-market regulation or the specific rules around finding accommodation, the consistent theme across all the cities that I've lived in is that it's damn difficult to find a place to live and a place that you can live comfortably for the period that you want to live in. Right. Whether it's in Australia with very large deposits, whether it's in the UK where finding an apartment is difficult, whether it's Hong Kong where the cost of living and the cost of accommodation is incredibly high. Every city, it's tough.
Which one was for you, personal experience was the most
hardest?
challenging? The hardest?
Shanghai, without a doubt.
Shanghai.
Language barrier is difficult. Cost of rent is very high. Regulation around foreigners living in Shanghai, extremely gnarly to navigate. Very difficult to do. Very difficult to do.
Okay, and Singapore, how about Singapore?
Singapore ranks a little bit easier, but the unique thing about Singapore's rental ecosystem is that there are so many intermediaries in finding a home. The typical customer experience that we see is somebody goes into a property listing website, whatever that might be. They see 20 properties that they like, 10 of which are real property listings, 10 of which are fake property listings. They inquire with these 20 property listings and they get responses from 10 agents. Those 10 agents then offer them visits at inordinate hours, late at night on the weekends, which don't fit your schedule. So you end up showing up for 5. For 5 of those visits that you want to do, only 2 of the agents show up. And of the 2 that you actually view, you make an offer. Only 1, if you're lucky, is accepted. Right. And so the number of steps and people and stages in the process it's extremely long, which makes what should be a very easy and fulfilling and enjoyable experience in finding a home and somewhere to call your home and a house where you want to live, it makes it difficult.
The thing that what Habyt is doing, and what Renly is doing as well, is that we're both kind of in the tech space as well as in the real estate space. Tech, of course, because that's a huge thing that's coming up. A lot of changes, a lot of innovation. Yeah. Real estate space, a bit of the opposite, right? Traditional, very old, not much innovation. Yeah. So, how do you feel like, let's just say, with these two things quite polarizing in general, how do you blend the two into, I would say, a cohesive product that you can share with your with people?
Great question. I think that you nail it. The real estate industry is old, and it's a little bit old-fashioned. And so when you are able to apply the tech aspect, whether it's tech-enabled or technology itself, that's where we unlock the most amount of potential for growth. Whether it's in the contracting process between a landlord and a tenant, whether it's in the experience of finding a place to live, or whether it's about the purchasing of a house, as a property owner. These processes are old school. And so by applying technology to it, we can innovate. And that's really where the excitement comes from. And that's, instead of calling it opposing forces, the way I think about it is that it creates the opportunity as a synergy.
The idea of a home in renting is very different from traditionally it's where my folks stay. Yeah. But when it comes to renting, most of the people you work with, they come from abroad. Yeah. And that kind of blurs what home is to them. I guess the question I have to you is what is home to you? And also at the same time, how do you make those people that you've been working with, how do you make them feel at home as well?
Yeah. In a weird way, the home for me is not a physical state of being, right? It's not physically where you are. Home is where you as a person feel the most comfortable. It is your sanctuary. It is where that you find yourself to rest and recharge. And so home in that way is not necessarily linked to the apartment that you live in, the room that you stay in, not linked to that. And so home for me is where my family is. Home for me is where I'm able to feel at peace, calm, and able to restore myself. And we try to do the same thing at Habyt. Right. We design our apartments and our rooms specifically in a way that allows the person who moves in to imprint themselves upon the building or the room that they're in. We choose a decor, we choose an aesthetic, we choose a design philosophy that is not overly overbearing. It's a design philosophy which allows and it tries to facilitate the person moving in to put themselves into the room or into the apartment.
I'm quite sure you've had many crazy rental stories that might happen. Or even personally for yourself, maybe if you've been in different markets. Yeah. What's one that's just popped into your head right now that you feel oh man, that's something I really want to share with everyone?
Never did I think that we would be involved in a missing persons case.
What?
In a missing person case. We had a member in one of our cities who vanished off the face of the earth.
Wait, was it here in this?
I can't share where.
Okay, go right.
Vanished off the face of the earth for 2 weeks, and we got calls from their family, their mother, their father, their sister, their brother, looking for this person. And so, as good law-abiding citizens, we facilitated that investigation as well as we could. Turns out, this individual had a 2-week sabbatical in the cyber gaming.
In a LAN shop.
In a LAN shop.
Yo!
Living, breathing, sleeping, showering at a LAN shop for 2 weeks, and emerged only after this 2-week period back to reality. But over this period, you can imagine the amount of stress that someone who had been living in one of our apartments, who'd contracted to live in one of our apartments, seemed to vanish off the face of the earth, entirely uncontactable for this period of time. We had a lot of panic, we had a lot of worry, but of course, at the end of it, a lot of relief. A very surreal experience for us.
I can imagine. Did he show up himself, or did someone find him right?
He emerged from the darkness.
Oh, wow. We're seeing a lot more people renting in general in Singapore.
Yep.
Why do you think maybe that might be the case? Could it be, let's just say, renting is getting a little bit more popular with the younger folks, or I don't know?
I think people are seeking independence a little bit earlier than maybe they were. What we see, what I observe is that we're seeing an increasing proportion of young couples actually choosing to take an apartment or take a room with Habyt. Yeah. And it's really interesting because the reason they're doing this is they want a little bit of independence from their families where they may have been living in the past, and B, they're trying to figure out, can they live together, right? And instead of They almost use the Habyt experience as a trial process to cohabitate, and see, does it work?
That makes sense, yeah.
Because sometimes what you find in markets and cities where people only move in upon getting married is that there's a little bit of a shock, right? A little bit of an adjustment. But with Habyt and on the flexible options that we provide, you're able to do that in a much more de-risked way.
Have you had any successful couples that came out of Habyt?
Many.
Really?
Many. Well, I can't disclose the number, but we do find that organic connection is fostered in a place that you can call home. Somewhere that it's safe, someone that it's comfortable, someone that you feel you can be the best version of yourself, which is what a home should be. And so we do see this really facilitates some really lovely connections and stories.
So John, I've been in the real estate space for about, I would say, 4 years now. And I think the thing with co-living is that there's kind of a bit of a negative view on the market about it, because some people think that co-living spaces are kind of jacking up renting prices a bit. So the whole market kind of moves up. Some people occupy a few rooms in a condo at maybe 1,007 when it's at 1,005. And I would say the whole condo goes up to 1,007 as well.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that? Do you feel like, that's something that makes sense to you?
Yeah.
Or like, do you feel, just generally get it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple angles with which to look at this with. The first is that the co-living industry, as much as we talk about it, as big as we think it is, it today represents less than 1%, even that, of total residential transactions or properties in Singapore. It is still such a small fraction that yes, there are these cases where the co-living operator comes in, pays a little bit more than your ordinary tenant would, but at an aggregate scale, the proportion of people or proportion of rooms that are going to co-living operators is still minute. So its actual broader impact on industry-wide rental prices should and is very limited. The second angle to look at this with is that, yes, there may be some specific cases where that one apartment or that one unit might be rented to a co-living operator at a higher price than it would be to an ordinary tenant. But what happens though with a co-living operator is that by slicing and dicing and having people share that space, is that you're effectively able to better utilize the common area, your living room, your kitchen, which typically are incredibly underutilized at an aggregate scale. Rough numbers put the amount of time that people spend in the living room and the kitchen at less than 5% of their time. So it is an underused area. What co-living does, it allows a better utilization of that space. And by doing so, what happens is that now customers are able to live in these areas, in these prime locations, at a fraction of the cost that it would be to rent their own private studio or their own private one-bedroom. So you might, for example, be able to rent a private one-bedroom in the heart of Orchard at between $2,000 and $2,500 or $2,000 to $3,000. But with a co-living option, you can get that same location with the same access to those same amenities and facilities at a significantly lower price. So in a way, yes, co-living does mean higher rental prices for some units, but it also allows a much more affordable option that can be offered to the market at scale.
And also just to get an understanding, because co-living came in, I would say maybe it kind of hit the world by storm maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Can't remember the exact number. And that kind of shook up a bit of how the real estate market kind of looked. And do you feel like maybe in the future as well, more of these, I would say, innovations or introductions of different ways of looking at real estate spaces will kind of, how would you feel that will kind of shape up the real estate market in the future in general? Yeah.
I think the first thing to remember, guys, is that co-living is actually not a new concept. It's a new version, a new name of it.
Oh,
But what is
okay.
co-living? It's flat sharing. And flat sharing has been around for decades and decades. People who are sharing an apartment is a very common and very ordinary thing, which has been around since the 80s, 70s, 60s, even before that. What co-living has done is co-living has made that experience of finding those flatmates so much easier. It's an innovation on process versus an innovation on product, in a sense. So co-living itself is not new in its purest form, because ultimately what it is 3, 4, 5, 6 people now sharing an apartment, which if I said this to you 20, 30 years ago, still existed at that point in time. The second is the world of residential real estate is moving. People, culture, the current generation is demanding more convenience and more flexibility. And so what's happening to the residential real estate market, or the customers looking at the residential real estate market, is they're looking a little bit less as the residential real estate as a long-term product, and they're looking at more as a hospitality type product. So they're seeking that same seamless experience that you and I would experience in going to a hostel or a hotel or a service apartment. You can be able to transact, find an apartment, move in seamlessly and frictionlessly. And that move towards now residential real estate looking a lot more hospitality is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of. And that puts the onus on us as co-living operators or flexible living operators to be at the forefront of that change and innovate our product and our offering to look a lot more like hospitality than residential real estate.
Let's just say fast forward to 2050.
Yeah.
How do you think the renting experience might be a little bit different in Singapore?
I've got some bold goals here, guys.
Yeah, man, throw it at me.
You know, macroeconomically or macro, there's some big themes happening, right? The rise artificial intelligence or generative AI, that's a thing. And already today, you know, there's bots, there are AI actors, there are things which are now being introduced to the classical brick and mortar world where bots are now transacting on behalf of real customers, right? They're almost gaming the system. And so in the future, where I see things going is that the real estate market, number one, will be incredibly seamless. You will be able to find a place to live and contract and agree to live in that place, even move in a matter of hours. I think we can shorten that process from what is probably now at least a matter of 4 to 6 weeks into a matter of 4 to 6 hours. That's where I think it's going to go. And I think what we'll also see is that individuality, the proof of personhood, is going to be a big element of who is able to rent. Because as we shorten the process, as we digitize or technologically enable the residential real estate process, it does leave more room for more risk for generative AI or bots to kind of come take a slice of that pie.
Yeah.
So we combine this idea of having a proof of personhood with the renting experience, which is a seamless and incredibly fast transaction, so that, to be entirely honest, renting a place is as easy as it is to call an Uber. That's where we're going to get. That's where we want to get to.
All right, so we're gonna play a little game, man, John. So this game is called Hold My Beer. It's great that you have a beer on hand right now.
All right.
Awesome, going strong. So this game, basically how it works is that you're gonna be holding some beer in your mouth.
Okay.
You know, right? You're gonna take a large sip, and I'm gonna be telling you some crazy rental stories.
All right.
Or maybe rental jokes, you know.
Okay.
See which one works better.
Okay.
Aim of the game, try not to spit out. Cheers. All right. Big gulp, I see, you know. So I've got a first joke for you, man. So the listing said, this place comes with ocean view, but then it was just a drain at that end up. I asked my landlord for new blinds. The landlord gave me sunglasses instead. So usually when I rent, I don't really need a dishwasher, you know. I need someone to whisper encouraging words to me in my ear every night. The neighbors party every night. When I complain, right, the landlord said, sounds fun, maybe you can invite me instead.